In December 1978, pilots on board two very different aircraft navigated high over the Pacific Ocean. Under normal circumstances, neither would be aware of the other. However, on this occasion, a series of escalating events thrust them, their aircraft, and almost 100 passengers into a high-stakes race against the clock. This is their story. Those who knew Jay Procknell best described him as a top-notch pilot and all-round great guy. A retired US Navy pilot, Jay earned his wings of gold flying warbirds like the A-1 Sky Raiders and A-3 Sky Warriors. Although he became a commercial pilot, before this, following his time in the Navy, he would take odd jobs here and there to make ends meet. In late 1978, a rather unusual opportunity presented itself when he and a friend were asked to deliver two Cessna 188 crop dusters from the United States to Sydney, Australia. Although a step down from flying warplanes from the flat tops of the US Navy, he was up for an adventure, and he and his family needed the money. With the limited range and fuel capacity of the Cessna 188 crop duster, the trip would be divided into 4 stages. After leaving the west coast, they would fly to Honolulu and then on to Pago Pago in American Samoa. From there, they'd stop at Norfolk Island before the final leg to Australia. Although the flight to Honolulu went well, as did the second flight to Pago Pago, it was the next flight where things would get dicey. On the 20th of December 1978, Jay and his colleague took off from Pago Pago bound for Norfolk Island. However, the flight was short after his friend crashed on takeoff. Although he was uninjured, the plane was a write-off, and Jay would have no choice but to land and try again the next day, albeit this time solo. After taking off the following day, Jay settled in for the 10-hour flight to Norfolk Island. However, unbeknownst to him, his aircraft had one minor defect, which was about to cause one very large problem. A few hours later in Fiji, the crew of Air New Zealand Flight 103 were preparing for their routine hop from Nandi to Auckland. On board the McDonnell Douglas DC-10 was 88 passengers. The captain was former Royal New Zealand Air Force pilot Gordon Vett, the first officer was Arthur Dovey, and the flight engineer was Gordon Brooks. The 2-hour flight should have been a walk in the park. However, the Air New Zealand crew would have their experience, patience, and navigational abilities tested like never before. By late afternoon, Jay Procknell was nearing the end of his 10-hour flight and approaching where he thought would be Norfolk Island. However, he could see nothing but open ocean instead of land in sight. Regardless, he figured it would be nearby and that he'd find it sooner rather than later. However, after doing positional checks to determine what was happening, he realized his automatic direction finder must have malfunctioned. Now he was way off course, and, even worse, he knew not where he or Norfolk Island was. On the plus side though, he had more than 10 hours of fuel remaining in the tank. Refusing to panic, he radioed air traffic control in Auckland to let them know. He then reduced his speed and continued to search for Norfolk Island. However, after 3 hours of flying and failing to find it, he radioed air traffic control again and declared an emergency. Fearing he had run out of fuel and plunged into the Pacific, they began searching for an aircraft that could help. The Air New Zealand DC-10, piloted by Gordon Vett, en route from Fiji to Auckland, was the only plane in the area. Once brought up to speed, Captain Vett and his crew knew that Jay was in serious trouble. But on the bright side, they had enough fuel and, more importantly, were eager to help. In addition, Vett was a licensed navigator, as was a passenger who volunteered to help. After discussing the situation with his crew, Captain Vett contacted Jay via HF radio. If they could figure out where he was, they could guide him to Norfolk Island and save his life. First, they devised a complicated but feasible solution using Jay's estimated location and heading, the DC-10's actual location, and the sun's position. Remarkably, it worked. Kinda. They still didn't know exactly where Jay was, but they estimated him to be around 400 miles or 643 kilometers to their southwest. Now, with actionable data, the DC-10 turned toward the Cessna. The situation was improving, but he knew that finding the Cessna was a 1,000,000-to-1 shot, so he devised a novel alternative. With the flip of a switch, the DC-10 released more than 20,000 gallons of aviation fuel into the atmosphere. It instantly vaporized, forming a trail Vet hoped Jay could see. Although worth a shot, in the fading light it all came to nothing. Next, he asked passengers to look out their windows in search of the Cessna. This also proved fruitless. By then, Jay had been flying nearly 20 hours and was nearing his wit's end. He announced to the crew of the DC-10 that he intended to ditch in the sea before it was too dark to do so. This would be easy enough in a small plane like the Cessna. However, in the vast expanses of the Pacific Ocean, he would likely never be found, and Captain Vet persuaded him not to. After another hour of failed attempts to make visual contact using various navigational tactics, the now night sky presented perhaps their last chance to save Jay's life, but it was also their best chance. To make visual contact easier, Vet turned on the DC-10's strobe, navigation, anti-collision, and landing lights in the hope Jay would see them. Miraculously, Jay did see lights, but it wasn't those of the DC-10. Jay had spotted an oil rig being towed from Auckland to Singapore. However, this was just as good, if not better. And now, with an exact position, the DC-10 turned toward the Cessna, and over the next hour, Vet guided Jay the 150 nautical miles to Norfolk Island. After more than 23 hours in the sky, Jay and his Cessna touched down safely, with merely minutes left in the tank. In the aftermath of the incident, McDonnell Douglas awarded the crew of Air New Zealand Flight 103 a certificate of commendation for their actions. Jay Prochnow and Gordon Vet became fast friends, stayed in touch, and are pictured here together. Although Captain Vet would shortly retire, Jay would have a long career with America West Airlines. Sadly though, flight engineer Gordon Brooks lost his life when Air New Zealand Flight 901 smashed into an Antarctic mountain less than a year later. Although initially blamed on the crew, Captain Vet and others appointed to a board of inquiry worked tirelessly to prove the crew's innocence and show the crash resulted from a flight path change the day before, which the crew were unaware of. In 1993, the Jay Prochnow story was made into a movie, Mercy Mission: The Rescue of Flight 771, which I'd highly recommend watching. Jay made his last commercial flight in 2002, and sadly, he and Captain Vet have both now passed. If you enjoyed today's video, I'd love it if you subscribed and joined me for the next one. If you missed my coverage of the Kismet train collision, you can click the link on screen. And, as always, thanks for watching.